How's it going, everyone? My name is Ben, and this is a lot more formal than I tend to do on my YouTube channel. I am running another Q&A before the draft. This will probably go up either Wednesday or maybe Tuesday, at some point before the draft on Thursday of this week, which is crazy. I did one of these with Mark Schindler about a year ago, and now I am here joined by Matt Powers at Draft Pal on Twitter, editor-in-chief at Swish Theory. Matt, how's it going today?
Hey, how's it going? I didn't realize I'm taking Schindler shoes. That's big responsibility to fill. Hopefully I can answer some fun questions
Yes,
up to
no, it
his
was.
caliber.
Of course, we
Yeah.
had a good time, and it will be a good time again with the questions that we get to. So, yeah, I had a bunch of you send me questions on Twitter and on YouTube. Thanks for everyone that submitted questions. I tried my best to include everything in here, and we have a lot of questions that we are going to attempt to get through all of them. And if we don't, I apologize, and you can always bug me on Twitter and ask me your question. But let's without rambling anymore, let's get started. So. The first question is from my guy Joe at Joe Holbert NBA. How would you feel about characterizing Jalen Hood-Schifino more as a smaller wing rather than a guard? Something I spoke about with someone recently. Matt, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I could to me I would have him as a two guard. Like to me it's like his
Yeah.
his shot making. I want to get him the ball as it's moving around as soon as possible. I mean, I could see maybe he's kind of like a man without a position on defense a little bit. So I could see um maybe sorry, I cheated. I saw your notes that you already have. I took your answer, but
No,
I
you're
agree with
good.
it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I fired it out to you. I fired it out to you. And yeah, I am honestly I'm definitely open to this idea of JHS as more of a wing than a guard. Because I think when you have him as a guard, it kind of um like it kind of limits what he can do because of how he struggles with creating separation and such. And as you can see, like if he is classified as a wing and he's doing stuff like this where he's getting downhill in the pick and roll, using his pace to score and finish at the rim, then that becomes a lot more enticing than if he's like kind of just a true PG to me because of his limitations in terms of pull-up shooting and getting all the way to the rim. I think the big thing is, yeah, it's like how can he hold up on defense as a wing, which I don't think is super wrong. As like I agree that he's like a straight two guard. I think that's probably his path because like his foot speed isn't the best or anything. He's not the most athletic guy, but like he's decent. And the fact that he's just like fairly large and not like the worst athlete ever means he could be solid on defense. So I think that JHS as a wing probably definitely makes sense as like a good way to value his upside because a wing with his like pick and roll skill set, I think can definitely be valuable.
Yeah, I do think like in some especially if he's running out in bench lineups, you could just with his wingspan if like he'll get some rebounding. And like just to have him as a roamer off ball, then
Yeah,
like sure he can probably pick up some steals, but I don't think like full time I wouldn't view him as that.
right. But I definitely think it is like a reasonable like possible role that he can have. Cool. Let's get to our next question. At Al Baby Cakes asks, when you were on Down to Dunk, you mentioned that if this class had a weakness, there aren't a ton of high field prospects outside of the guys at the top and in the lottery. Who are your top five high field guys in this draft? I'll let you start with this one, Matt.
Yeah, I think yeah, outside of the top one, I would say like I mean, does Casey Wallace count as a top guy still if he goes like
I
15 or
mean,
so?
I like didn't do any,
That's
I
cheating.
didn't include anyone who, I mean, yes, I mean, like, I didn't include anyone that was like in the lottery range, but like
Right,
Nathan, like
okay.
Anthony Black, obviously, are like
There's guys
topping this list if you're counting that. Um,
right. I do think I don't know, would you overall think it's like a low feel draft? I guess I think there is some pockets of feel. Like Colby Jones, I feel like is a pretty high feel
yep,
player. I'm really high
yep.
on like Justin Mutz. I want to see more love for him as like a potential second rounder from Virginia Tech. He's
Yeah,
like
I don't know
just
anything about Mutt, so could you give a quick elevator pitch for folks like me who don't have a take on him?
Yeah, sure. He's a big guy at like 6'6", but like 7'2" wingspan. He played like 4-5 kind of a connector role for Virginia Tech. He like his assists kept rising every year, which he kind of started out his career as kind of like an energy big wing. But then this year he averaged like 8.5 assists per 100 possessions or something like that for him. He's like really good at finding cutters, can dribble a little bit, shoot in the mid range a little bit. So like there's the question of can he hit a corner three? But I definitely expect to see him get some at least like good G League reps and put up some numbers there. And but he's definitely a high field player to me. Yeah.
Awesome. That is for sure someone to watch, someone who I'm previously unfamiliar with. I feel like, yeah, I've said outside of like a men, Scoot, whatever, Wemby, like even like Anthony Black, like there definitely are like blind spots in terms of feel and passing, especially in that mid range when you get into guys like Bryce and some of the swings like GG and Max, like a lot of these guys just not necessarily the highest feel guys, but in terms of guys who I feel like, I mean the obvious one that we both love is Brandon Pachemsky, who we'll talk about more. Um, I think, are you a Craig Porter guy?
Yeah, I was actually watching him more last night too, because I'm doing the write up for him for our switchboard that's about to come out. But
Yeah.
yeah, he's so cool. I moved him up like 15 spots just watching
I
him
have,
because
yeah,
yeah, sorry,
I
go
have
ahead.
him in like the early, like the late 30s or something. Like he is again another really high field player as a really unique, like 6'2" rim protecting guard with a really impressive handle. Um, the defensive instincts are really ridiculous. Um, he's just so good at like seeing plays multiple steps ahead and defending and like disadvantage and like being a good like havoc defender. He really is to me. Like I was talking to our guy Chip about this. Like he really is like shorter, worse Derek White, which isn't like a slight at all. Like Derek White was just the second best team on a team that almost made the final, like second best guy on a team that
Yeah,
almost
yeah,
made the finals. Like, I think like Porter is I think 23 already, and the shot is for sure a concern. But as a guy who like has profiled like role players who ended up being really valuable, I think he's totally worth the second round pick. I think we're aligned there.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he's like just such a smart player. And I always like to see guys like perform well in slightly other settings too. Like I think in Portsmouth Invitational tournament, he popped like immediately, so that's cool.
That's good
But
to know.
yeah, and he like gets downhill pretty well too. Like he gets to the rim quickly,
Yeah, he has a
so it's not
great
like he's an
handle. Yeah,
offensive zero. Yeah,
yeah.
but yeah,
Just like like the shot is like first 6'2" guy who isn't like a great shooter. That's always a concern. But like he's like a good mid range shooter, an amazing pick and roll guy in terms of craft and getting his handle. Like I was really
yeah,
impressed with his on ball stuff when I watched him, and I'm a big fan of his. Another
yeah.
one, I think Andre Jackson's another obvious one who showcased his brilliance in the tournament, both as an offensive and a defensive player. Of course, going to be like the shooting and the scoring that is his swing, but he's a brilliant, brilliant player. Um, and then the other two I had were Tosan Woman and Jalen Slauson, who I know you like.
That's
Uh,
Lawson. Yeah,
two just
he's yeah.
large players with really impressive passing instincts and defensive flashes on both ends. Do you have thoughts on either of those guys or anyone else that you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of like Justin Mutz, and like I even will argue like Jackson Davis has become a high field player over the years, but
Mhm.
all kind of in the same vein of like guys, if you want to like run delay, just have them like I don't know some Warriors that system, and just like have guys that you comfortable making decisions the ball. I think there's a lot of those wings. Just I kind of think seems like a trend that's gonna keep happening every year with just more big guys handling the ball in general. But Andre Jackson, his like instantaneous decision making is always like pops to me. Like he's like just goes into slow motion mode like here and there on some of his
Yeah.
blocks.
Yeah, he is just
Yeah,
a brilliant decision maker on both ends. The way that like there are a few guys better than him at like existing while being the worst scorer ever than him. Like obviously it's a big concern and it's something to note, but like in terms of figuring out like how to work around that weakness, like there's basically nobody better than him.
yeah,
He is fantastic. And yeah,
yeah.
I think with Slauson and with Tosan and with TJD as well. It's these like DHO bigs who can run actions out of like high post, mid free throw line extended areas are just becoming more and more important in the NBA. I mean, obviously, you see teams like the Nuggets run that offense at the highest level, but a lot of teams run it on a like a more time space basis level. It's a really good thing to have, and it's something that's going to make guys like Slauson and Tosan and TJD, like even if they aren't stars or anything, like real role players, and Colby as well. We didn't mention, but awesome. Are there any other high feel sleepers that you wanted to mention?
I think we got all of them.
I
They're
think
the
we
main ones for
I
sure.
think we did cover. I think we covered most of them. Awesome. Next, at Chip J NBA, as mentioned before, who are some players that you've only heard positive things off of the court? So you're asking for intel. Sorry, Chip, but you got anything for this one?
I'm like honestly not a big as big. I'm a very like film like slow film guy where I'll just like watch the same thing over and over again. I think honestly the only thing that came to mind it was like just I had to watch so much like Nick Smith and Derek Whitehead while injured this year and just like imagine fighting through that scenario. That's
Yeah,
kind of more where I just try to put myself in
for
their
sure.
footsteps and like it's really hard to kind of see them struggle through pain sometimes. So it's always I mean, I don't want to like say this is something I want to see every year. I'd prefer that not happen.
Right, right.
But if it does, like it's cool to see guys fight through that.
Yeah, I agree that especially for Nick, because like he very easily could have just like called it and probably been a lottery pick anyways, but like he went back and wanted to play, which I find admirable. Like regardless of like how you perceive that decision from like a pro perspective, like I think it's certainly like a good thing to see that like someone wants to play high leverage basketball, they want to help their team win. Even though his tournament was disappointing for a lot of people, like I think he still deserves credit for going out there and like
Yeah.
going with those injuries because like lower body injuries are really tough. And like hand injuries too, like especially for like
Yeah.
guards too, which he's just
And I
dealt with
will say, yeah.
for a while
Yeah.
now.
And it just like it also just matches how he like for his style of play too to be like kind of a scoring guard who like more like kind of cosmetic role where like they just need him to shoot and score. He always like kind of impressed me on defense and just like running through screens and stuff like that, which you wouldn't expect again considering all the factors. So just like I think it kind of fits into my picture of him as someone that you would think is just like someone's going to come in and play a little bit of one, a little bit of two, and like call it a day. But he kind of, makes his presence felt in general.
Yeah,
But yeah,
agreed. Absolutely. I'm gonna go with I have basically only never heard anyone say a bad thing about either of the twins. Um, Also I'm not like a huge Intel guy. Um, but I have spoken to a lot of people with OT and like built relationships with people. And I do know people in all spheres who basically like yeah, I've never heard anyone say a bad thing about a man or a star, just in like, private stuff or like in like the interviews you read or the stuff that the media stuff they do. I mean, just two very like smart, like well-educated, driven kids who like just want to like hoop. They just want to play in the NBA. That's about it. And I think something that is probably under discussed with OTE is like obviously it's at a much smaller scale than the NBA, but like they already know what it's like to be stars. Um, where in college basketball, like it's just quite different. Even if you're like a star at that level, where like OTE, like both of them had like game-winning shots in like the finals of their league, and they know what it's like to be like the face of a league. Where and even in college, like it's not really like the faces of leagues are always like teams and stuff, but it's not like
mm.
player base. So I think that matters for both the twins in terms of like handling the limelight and the spotlight as pros. So yeah, I mean that is my answer. Is both of the twins seem like anything off court or whatever, like personality, locker
Yeah,
room, not going to be a reason that they fail if it does happen. So
right. And just on top of that, just like a pet peeve of mine, there's like people complaining about like the OT environment, but it's like these guys knew what they wanted to accomplish. Like there's much more of a like direct training plan with the players
right,
there. So it's like when you're taking more charge of your career than you would because like we've seen how inconsistent like playing time can be in NCAA or otherwise. So like I just want to at least like remove that negative connotation is
exactly,
always bothers me.
exactly.
Yeah.
Agree for sure. All right, next question. at JP. Oh, sorry, skip one. At JGG5112. From what you could tell from film, who are the loudest, best communicators on the floor? Assume this is fall to defense, but more curious for offensive leaders. Do you have anyone here or anyone that stands out to you as like a active communicator when you watch?
Yeah, I think especially as far as like improvement communicating was Derek Lively over the season. I
Yeah,
think maybe
that's a good call.
I realized like I'm not as big of like a school AU hoops guy, so I didn't realize he'd played with Jalen Duren before.
Yep, they played
It's
together in
like
EYBL.
yeah, for this new piece, I was like going back and watching some old tape, and it like makes sense that he's more of like has the roamer instincts versus the like sole rim protector in that context. But I think like he really kind of figured out a lot of that stuff over the season at Duke. I don't know if like inspired by like his benching decline and playing time, but I think he really like responded well and just like seemed to really figure out a lot of those like traditional big man defensive things. Yeah, how
Agreed.
about you?
Absolutely. I think it's super impressive the way he responded this season. Um, Jarris Walker is a communicator. He is always like swiveling his head and it seems like he's barking out orders. I don't have like a super concrete answer to this one, but that is one I like certainly I notice. Like you will notice him yelling at guys and like making like active efforts to like talk with his teammates on like offense and defense. And I mean it checks out with him just being a stellar defensive prospect and prospect in general.
Yeah.
But
It's because he knows everything that's happening.
yeah,
So it would be
he's
irresponsible
just
for him not to. Yeah.
right. It would be irresponsible for him not to share that
Like,
information with his teammates.
yeah. Right.
Awesome. So let's get to the next question at JPK_draft. Do you think shooting spacing thresholds are lower for less threatening drivers? Take Asar and I don't know, Repair, for example. Won't it be much easier for Repair to become a confident floor spacer due to his inferior athleticism driving playmaking? What do you think on this one? I thought this was interesting. It was an interesting question. So
Yeah, I kind of would take the opposite of approach in that like I'm very much in the belief that like all skills on or all traits on a basketball floor are kind of like fungible. Like you can like one anything that you're good at in one area is going to help you at least a little bit in another area, right? So
mm,
driving threat, you have to cover more like yeah, it just opens up more space, gets you softer closeouts, and these things kind of tend to compound where like more driving threat, your drives will be a little easier, stuff like that. Do you have a different take?
nope, I agree with you fully. I kind of feel the opposite. It's kind of it's an interesting thought that like people who just like aren't threatening drivers, like they might not play the drive, and they might let them close out. Like I think they mentioned Asar in their question, which was an interesting option. There were moments where Asar like had lots and lots of time to shoot and such, where he would just like have moments where he like here he just like checks his feet, it's a pull up. I think he's probably going to be too good of a shooter to really do that. But I think Asar not being super bursty is going to hurt him more than it helps him. Like on plays like this where he just can't create separation and has to throw up like a off balance pull up. I think those plays honestly just make things more difficult than they make them easy, just because like those shooting reps are going to be harder than if they get run off the line and have to shoot an open 20-foot pull up or something like that. And I fully agree with you that like skills tend to be additive, and being good at like one thing helps people be good at other things. So I think it's an interesting perspective. That if like there's maybe like if they have the worst playmaking athleticism, like you can focus on shooting more. Defenses might not be as worried, but it's also like if you don't have that playmaking athleticism, it's harder to get on the floor. It's harder to like get a chance to develop your shooting when you aren't providing anything else.
Yeah, I could see like if you're saying like developmentally, like Azar compared to Amen, like he'll probably have, like Amen, you're gonna want to like guard him snug the entire time and like on his hip to prevent that initial burst. Well, Azar probably is gonna get some corner threes and
Yeah.
like get some more off ball reps. So like as far as like developing over time, yeah, it can create like more clarity of role, I guess.
Yep.
But yeah, so yeah.
Cool. I think that's a good question. Let's move on to the next one. I'm actually going to skip. I'm actually going to do one. I'm going to do a lot of order. At Nick's feed asks, who are the greatest value players at their respective range in the draft? So my thoughts on this one are the first obvious one I think is Derek, which is just going to be like an injury question, really. But I do think it's like even worth betting on him. like we've seen guys like Michael Porter Jr. and other players like that overcome like the injury red flags to be really useful players. I think Derek is an obvious one. I also think Ricky Council is pretty undervalued, where it seems like consensus and such has him as like a late second undrafted type player, when as a real wing shot maker with elite finishing and real handling and shot making upside. I think as like a wing scorer, there are obviously real problems with his feel and with his not like great shooting or anything, but I think that's a swing that some team like even like early mid second should be taking. Are there any other big like who are like the big names you think of when you think of like consensus or like the guys who are going to be
Yeah.
huge values at wherever they go?
We talked about Pods a little bit as a high feel guy, but I'm really surprised because he looked so good in like the combine scrimmages too. Like I
Yeah,
thought he looked like
yeah, he
a
was the
step
best.
ahead.
Yeah, he was the best player there for sure.
Yeah. And usually those guys can like really ride that wave for a few weeks, but seems to have settled at like 29 on average right now, which is really surprising because he seems like such both locked in value play, like can play immediately, plays so hard, like good feel, like capable in a lot of areas. But because of those reasons, also has like that upside, as kind of like that false stealing play or whatever. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody reached a little higher than 29 from
Yeah,
come draft day.
agreed.
Um, but yeah, I mean, honestly, we talked about Azar at him at 7. I really like still. I'm like really high on him. I think I have him next to Amen on my board. Um, but yeah, I just in general I think there's a lot of like the top 20 I think are really strong. So I think like he mentioned Whitehead. Whitehead's like he's probably my biggest value right now at 24. But yeah, I think there's just gonna be some talent that falls in general.
Always
We
is.
have diverging like ideas on GG Jackson, but like if he goes in the beginning of the second round, I think even like the doubters would see like the
Right.
talent is
Even I
worth at
think,
least like
right. I mean, I think that's like
maybe.
around the range that I have him in. And if like in that range, I think he's a good value. Like I think that's like for me the range that I support. And I think it's like that totally makes sense where he's going.
Yeah.
Um
So we have complete agreement on GG Jackson.
yes, we're sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
handshake.
yeah,
Okay.
we can go with that.
All right.
Um I think you make a good point about Pachemski. I've had him as like a top 20 guy or that range for quite a while now. And I agree that he's like a prime example of upside not being fully tied to athletic tools, where I think there obviously are ways where his athletic limitations could limit his ceiling and his ability to get on the floor and play. I think that's certainly a possibility. But also just given that he is like quite big, like he's not a small guard. And he's like shown the ability to use his strength in a functional way to create shots for himself and others, and the fact that he's just so skilled and such a good shooter and a really skilled defender. Like I think there's certainly a world where he's like not a long-term NBA player just because of the athletic limitations, but I also think there's a world where he exceeds his upside in some way that maybe people don't expect. He becomes a really elite pull-up shooter, or like just one of the league's better passers, or just a really valuable like dribble, pass, shoot, defense 6'5" guy, which are invaluable in the playoffs and such. So
Right.
fully agree with you there as well. And then just like Tosan, Craig Porter, like Jalen Slauson, these like mid-major guys that are like usually undrafted on most like mocks and boards who should be going in like the mid-second. But we already talked about those guys, and we'll probably talk more about them later. All right, we have two kind of connected questions. First, simply at draft latest asks, what is Bryce Sensabaugh's ceiling? Which is a loaded question, but I'll let you take this
Who's
one.
going? Okay. I mean, I really like him as a scorer. I think he could be a leading scorer for a good team. Like I think if things go well, just because it's really hard to project like conditioning changes for a guy who is like a little like you'd probably prefer him to be like 5 pounds lighter or to 10 pounds lighter, just like to be able to get past that first line of defense a little bit. But it's really hard to tell when guys end up in an NBA locker room and get like all their time to focus on just maximizing all their athletic like potential. Like that first step is what's kind of preventing him from being that first leading scorer on a good team. And I think you never know. Like he's so good at using his size to get where he wants in the lane once he has that opening. Like the margins for him to get into a shot are just like so small. I like to bet on guys like that where you don't even need to have things like slow down for you. You don't need things run entirely for you. Like it's hard for him to have a bad shot. I am like I think probably a little on the higher side for his passing and defense too. I don't think he's like a great passer, especially considering like how good his shooting gravity was. But I could, that stuff is pretty unpredictable. He's like a pretty creative player overall. Like I think he had some good ideas that like showed up, just like the consistency wasn't great. Same for defense. Like he seemed to like know kind of what to do, but just and like his rebounding was really strong, which I like to bet on too. So I think he's like a high variance player, right? So that's why he's
Yeah,
still around
for sure.
like end of lotto for me because like
Yeah.
it could really pay off
I
in a
have
big way.
him
Yeah.
roughly the same range, maybe a little lower. And I'm going to connect this to the next question that we have as well, which is at pick and row, how important is a player's scoring value system when you're projecting creation upside? Players who may value getting to their mid range when it's supposed to be a counter, or players get to the rim and leverage their game through that. Bryce versus Ant Black. And I think Bryce is a good example of how there's like not one like correct scoring value system, where there's definitely like trends and general like ways of scoring that tend to be more efficient. And others like getting to the rim, getting free throws, getting easy shots, all that is good. But as we know with Bryce, like that like left elbow contested mid range is a layup for him at this point.
Right.
He's just such a unique player in the way he gets his shots. Like there are plays like this where Bryce will start going downhill and like have an advantage that he can create, or maybe if he took another dribble, he could sustain this advantage and get all the way to the rim. But he's comfortable just stopping for this little hop fadeaway, and for good reason because he hits that shot at an absurd clip. Is like generally okay process where you have this open three that you're not confident enough to shoot, and then not forcing the defense to close out, which makes your drives even more difficult. So I think that for Bryce specifically, I think the way he creates is fine, and it's like the way he creates now is going to be the way he creates if he ends up being a star or if he ends up being bad. Like I think it's going to be like reliant on tough shot making and reliant on like the mid-range craft scoring. I agree with you that I think the burst and also like the vertical explosion, like potentially limiting his finishing against the highest level rim protection, are the big kind of gatekeeps from him being a real scoring star. I see him. I think he could be like the lead scorer on like a 9 seed, or like someone who provides better offense on like a playoff team in like in a complementary role. It's so difficult. Again, I've said this all cycle that I struggle with Bryce a lot, just because his ceiling is so tantalizing with that shot making, but there are also a lot of ways that could go wrong with defense and the playmaking, and also just like scaling down into a role where he's playing with other stars. And obviously, I think at this point, Bryce, I think he's going to be a fine spot up shooter and someone who can space, but you're missing out if you don't have him soaking up possession. So.
Yeah, just the like I had to look up the mid range again. Like 172 mid range attempts at 49%. Like that's just such a good
Ridiculous.
indicator for like
And
a
I'm
guy
sure
who
it's
knows to
also
get
just
to his
like
spots, right? Yeah.
I know it's like vast majority unassisted as well too.
Yeah.
I don't, which is just ridiculous. All
But
right.
yeah.
Let's get to the next question. At Okachuk Woody, Leslie. I have actually never tried to say your at, so apologies for that one. Which has consistently been your favorite team or teams to watch, whether it be due to the schemes they run or simply a run of oddball prospects that have come out of that program over a 2 or 3 year period. I always find that Arkansas has prospects that I really like. Whether it's like the top guys like Nick Smith or Ant Black or whatever, or like sleeperies like Jordan Walsh or Jalen Williams, or like I loved Isaiah Joe. This recent Arkansas run has just been producing a bunch of really, really fun prospects. And just generally the way that like they're allowed to do kind of whatever they want and play in that system. So yeah, Arkansas is a team that I always end up watching a lot of just because they always have players that I end up liking for whatever reason. Are there any teams or situations that you think there?
Yeah, Arkansas also for me, they're just like so like dynamic and up tempo was fun to like. Their players are always like very interesting. This year I really liked March Madness this year because like Miami and UConn were like my two favorite teams to
Yeah,
watch, and they both
yeah.
like did really
I
well.
love
Like
Miami.
you can, yeah, both just teams like where all five players on the court just like know exactly what their role is, and like they all are both like have kind of protected role, but in a way that doesn't hurt their upside too, and like they can still like I'm like the highest person on like Tristan Newton on UConn as a point guard, and like I mean I don't know every single one of those guys like Sonogo I think it will be. I think that gives such a leg up to like when they come into the NBA, just to like. Sorry, I'm like becoming like an old like coach guy, but like I
It's
know
all
how
right.
to play the like I don't know.
Yeah,
Both
I think
both
they
teams,
run
yeah.
a lot of like I think they run a decent amount of like fairly pro style stuff. Um like the movement stuff with Hawkins and obviously all of like the DHO spacing, pace centric stuff they do with Andre Jackson. So I agree. And then Miami as well. Like I like a team of like a bunch of fringe prospects is always going to be fun.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with those two. I think Isaiah Wong is probably a little underrated as like a legit like big scoring guard who at worst I think is probably going to like be a monster in Turkey or something if it doesn't end up working out in the NBA.
Yeah. I do think I like underestimated at first just like those teams that just like look really dominant on and like in certain situations where like there is that certainty of role and just like again like Andre Jackson, you know exactly how to work around his limitations because UConn like did that so well.
Right.
So I think there really does give even though you're just viewing them as a prospect in their own like skills, having such like a pro ready like systems is always a great to see. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, next question. At Sully says underscore. Can you all share your checklist slash process on what you look for when you begin evaluating guard prospects? This is a big question that we'll try to
Yeah.
quickly run through. Matt, you want to start us off here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to see if they're like primary bets, you see if they can win at the first level, if they like can win easily with either like some combination of handle and burst. Um, I don't know. I usually use this kind of works for my like my value system, scoring value system question too, is like I always remember there's some like old Kareem Abdul-Jabbar video where it's like you only need four moves. You need like a right move, a left move, a right counter to go left, a left counter to go right. And like as long as you have those four, then like you can so like whether that's going all the way to the rim, going like finding mid range, like some like step back. So just like as long as you have both the spots that you know you're comfortable going to as your primary move and that like secondary counter, then that's like and then from there gauge like how easily they're winning that. Um, is it going to translate against all levels of competition? How like how do they how does their skill compare the first level to the second level, right? Do their counters kind of like dry out after the first move? Yeah. How about you?
Yep, I fully agree. I think the first thing, especially with guards, is really difficult. Like the first thing is like primary or not. Where if they think they are primary, like you said, winning at the first level with first step or handling creativity or strength or whatever it is, like what tools do they have that allows them to be a primary, whether it's size or athleticism or skill or feel or whatever. And if not, like, what role are they going to fill? Because I definitely don't think being a non-primary as a guard is a death sentence at all, especially in an NBA with so many giant ball handlers and giant shooters and giant passers. Are you going to be like a point of attack D point guard? Are you going to be like an off ball guard? Like where are your skills? Are you like what is your shooting like? Are you a good off ball player? Can you play without the ball? I think is a big thing for guards that aren't primaries as well. So that's just like a quick cliff notes of what I look at during
Yeah.
guard scouting. Awesome. So next one we have at Argus11. How do you see current basketball trends affecting skill importance with prospects? Are there any prospects this year that's indicative of, i.e., Presti pointed out good decision makers are becoming more important with the evolution towards a fast react game. Yeah, I think that's super true. And has been true that like decision making and feel are just gonna never stop being important and keep being more important. I think that's why a lot of the high field guys we talked about, like Colby Jones, Pochemski, Cason Wallace, etc., are valuable because of that as well.
Yeah, just on top of that, I think it's another thing. I mean, obviously, decision making is becoming more important, just like as like pace is really fast. But I think also it's becoming easier to be like an offensive specialist and just like have your own like whether it's like downhill scoring or like closeout attacking. I think it's team like offensive gotten a lot more creative figuring out like quick hitter plays or how to isolate very specific advantages. So you don't have to be some like all encompassing offensive talent to be like some high end like draft pick. Like you can just be even more specialists in different roles like that. Someone like Jordan Hawkins or like I think Bilal Koulibaly, is that how you pronounce the last name? I think his like rim finishing is potentially really special. Like I think if a team can figure out how to get him into like an up pace system and like just get him downhill towards the rim over and over again and keep developing that, I think like there you just let him develop pick and roll like all that. I think there's way more customization, I guess, was what I would say.
Yeah,
And then yeah, also yeah, go ahead.
I feel that with like a lot of like I think having like so many teams run through like enormous initiators can help you like condense positions where or condense roles where you don't have like having a small guard initiator like you need defense to compensate or rebound. Like when you have all these things in fewer positions, you can have more specialists. And I think there's some truth to the idea that like specialists don't play in the playoffs like generalists do, which I think is fair to an extent. But you also see guys like Caleb Martin in the right situation for a team that just like really needs a pick and roll shot maker, like doing that.
Yeah,
So I
I
think
should say specialists with minimum level of like threshold of like of like all ancillary skills, not just like everyone. I mean, I did want like Sam Hauser to play more minutes.
Sam Hauser's
Regardless,
so
but
good. He's gonna be good.
yeah. Anyways,
But yeah, fully agree. And then I think the other one is just like movement skills, ground coverage, as it like defensively is just so important. As we saw the Nuggets just like rip teams apart who couldn't run with their players and chase Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon around the floor while Jokic did his thing. Just in general, I think having players who can cover a lot of space, change directions, do stuff like that is just so important. Like
yeah,
it's becoming more and more important as a consequence of I think initially people like were like, oh, the consequence of like the pace and space offense is going to be switching guys are really important when it seems like it's actually oh no, it actually matters a lot more if you can like cover a lot of space with one or two players to take away the
right.
advantages created by like switches and stuff.
Yeah, there's just so many ways that like ground coverage and awareness like pay dividends, right? Or just like for guys like I think Anthony Black, Jerace, and Kaysen, that's just like the highest feel like connector type. Basically
Yep.
everything Kaysen Wallace does will translate well because he's so quick at locking into scheme and preventing whatever those like quick hitter advantages are. If you can sniff them out before they even start, and like everyone be if you're like really connected to your teammates and be able to like next the PNR and stuff like that, like I don't know. I'm so excited to see like Case in the NBA system. I think he's
I'm
gonna
so
like
hyped
do
for
so many
Kaysen.
cool
Yeah,
things. But yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Anyways,
All right. I'm gonna prioritize questions because we don't have that much time left. But let's just keep going through these. At Coop Giants 2013, does a team like Sacramento draft for upside or production right now? Furthermore, if CD and Chris are still on the board at 24, who would you pick between those two? So, first question, I think I'm still probably always drafting for upside, like basically regardless. I don't think the Kings are good enough or set enough to be like that rare situation where you can just like draft a guy like Christian Brown and not worry about getting someone with a lot of upside because you have all like that's your mid or like where like the Suns would be if they had a first round pick in this draft. Um I literally just think they need to get like anyone who defends. Like just get like whoever the best defensive player on the board is, like draft that guy. Like I think it's probably actually that simple for them at this point.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I agree with you. I'm very strongly on the like upside first, just because I feel like there's much more difference of opinion for upside too. So therefore, like when you're in the
Yeah.
middle to late first, like there's going to be so much more disconnects versus like everyone's looking for the same like fit guys and to some degree. But yeah, I agree they should get someone that defends. I actually really like Noah Clowney for them. I'm not super high
Yep,
on Clowney in
I like
general,
I like that a lot as well.
but that's someone who can like you keep the upside, but he's like perfect big like 3-4 defender. Can hit some shots for you, can like finish at the rim because they don't really have like a great roller right
Right.
now.
I love, yeah.
Um,
I'm
it's my favorite for
I've
them.
I've become pretty in on Clowney just because I think his like projected archetype role is so valuable as that. Like I did the whole video on like Jaden McDaniels, like the 3 and rim pro guys, where especially for a team like Sacramento, I think like there are so many teams who just really need players who can protect the rim, not even like not from the center position and can do some stuff on offense. So I literally just think anyone. I mean, I think Chris Murray could kind of fit that. Like I don't love Chris Murray, but I think like his defense is pretty solid. As a guy who has some pretty solid movement skills for a 6'8" player, is a pretty solid perimeter defender, especially guarding down for someone that size.
Yeah,
But
I like City's fit there too, just because like I like anyone who can get downhill playing off bonus, right? And just
yeah,
like anyone with
I think
speed.
that offensive fit makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, defense would be a little risky, and I don't know how helpful short term. But if you're going to take an upside play, I think it could be like an interesting longer
Yeah.
term fit versus taking second Murray. Um, I don't know. It's fine. I like Chris Murray fine, but like this idea is just like I think a little. I don't know. It's
Yeah,
too
I think
neat,
it's just kind
too
of
cute by half. I think.
whatever. Yeah, I mean, I think Chris is like a very intriguing get in this range because as someone without a ton of upside, but is probably just going to be a solid 7th or 8th man, and that like definitely is valuable. And then there's also the other side where like CD's, especially defensively and like with the shot, it's like, there are a lot of ways it could fail, but with the motion offense and with Sabonis and Fox and the pace and getting downhill, there is a lot of upside for that passing and playmaking skill to be really useful as well. Awesome. So next one, is that Zach E. Fine? I think apologies asks, guy you just don't see it with. I figured we could use this as a chance to discuss some of our differences because the guy I
Okay.
wrote was Max Lewis, who I know you're definitely higher on than I am.
Oh, I've actually soured a lot on him, so
Oh,
I've
interesting.
like,
I didn't actually know that.
so you've
Um,
won that, that battle.
maybe not. I mean, I'll just quickly talk about Max, where I have clips of this that I'm gonna pull up really quick.
Yeah.
So I think Max is really frustrating because there are very interesting traits. Um, I think as you've pointed out, like like the stride length, flexibility, like balance stuff is the most impressive tools that he has. Where some of his drives and finishes, where he's able to use his stride length and extension to finish and create and like to capitalize and finish advantages, where he uses like a good pace dribble here and the long steps and like the off foot finish are really impressive. I think those moments are great. But I just think the downside at this point is pretty significant. Um, as like I mean, he was certainly miscast at Pepperdine as like a straight on ball playmaker where he struggles to make like good decisions consistently. And the shot selection, well, like not being an elite shooter or anything was certainly concerning. And I don't have any clips, but to me, the defense was like really, really underwhelming.
Yeah.
Obviously, for young players, especially off ball defense can be fixable, and it is a thing that teams work on and help improve. But I definitely think he's like behind for his age relative to other players of
Yeah.
that. So you said you've soured on Max, but maybe you can like
Yeah.
still give some more of the positive
I can speak to
take
the
there.
upside.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like when he puts together like some of these moves on ball, it's like I mean, like when his stride length is crazy. He moves like his first step is good. I think he's really good like keeping his balance after like a spin or step back or something like that. So he is like he's very talented. And again, it's like it's mostly the stride length, right? Like he creates so much separation so quickly. But then like kind of a consequence of that like crazy stride length is he can't do like choppy steps very well on defense or even to like just alternate the footwork for more like pick and roll reps or something like that. You can't really like slow things down and like get a man in jail and then like take him to the rim. It's all very like quick reactive scoring. And yeah, and the defense is just been like pretty rough in general. Like
yeah,
he falls asleep and just I guess like his execution I is what I really like soured on the more I watched him against like tough teams. He like just like honestly like stepped out of bounds a lot and stuff like that. Just like the turnovers that are were pretty careless. And again, like as a second year player, I do think he was like a little later to basketball, which could explain some of it, but it's an uphill battle for
Right.
sure.
And especially I think it's like both a good and a bad thing that I think this was like this year was like in most ways probably a regression from last year where I thought he was like quite interesting. Like his stock rates went down a lot this year. I think his general obviously like playing a much bigger role this year, but still I think there was just generally a lack of like seeming like focus on both ends, which is never a good thing. And the reasons people like him, I think, are pretty obvious. Like a handling, smooth, potential shot making 6'7" player are always valuable. And I think like at his peak, like his best moments, like he does look kind of like Vassell-ish on offense, where he can use his size and smoothness and like height and release point to make some impressive plays. But the consistency and the overall downside to me is just like I would still take him at some point in the second as just like a creation flyer, but I definitely don't think he's like a top 20 pick like some people um are kind of in as.
Yeah, he's probably my biggest decliner because I thought he had like top 10 potential just
Right.
based
I
on those
recalled
like
that
the
you were,
highlights, right? But
yeah,
now he's around 30 for me.
right.
So
And I was like quite intrigued by him after his freshman year. Like I had him as
mm,
like one of my top 5 returning guys. I was really interested. And I definitely think I was a little disappointed by that.
yeah,
But there is obviously something there and a reason people like him. So
right.
who
Yeah.
is the guy that or is there anyone you
Oh, for me, yeah. From I
oh, and
mean,
I also wanted
uh,
to say, this is like I wrote this before he withdrew, but Bobby Klintman before he went back, I just I don't know,
yeah.
like
I don't know if you know I went to Wake Forest actually and I
yeah,
still did
yeah,
not really see it with him. But yeah, my answer for this is just like I still have him like 11 or 13, I think. But Cam Whitmore,
I figured you'd say that. So I'm
I
very
don't see it,
interested to
you know.
hear like the sour pitch because I feel like I'm pretty high on Cam and I feel like a lot of people are really high on Cam
So
Whitmore.
many
So
smart people that I follow
what
are high
is
on Cam. Um,
what is the your pitch for why you
all
are
right.
lower on him?
And I even like I went to like a Big East game just to like see in person. I was like, I still don't. I think he's like he's very programmatic with his like how he gets to scoring. Like he usually like drives left. He has the pullback dribble or whatever. I think especially I watched a lot of like his high school AU tape. He really struggles with like single hand moves, like in and out. He's turned the ball over on like a ton of just like and it like the handle complexity not great. All right, first of all, I think the finishing I think is very impressive just with strength and jump leaping obviously, but I think he struggles to turn corners quickly. And that especially can pop up around the rim in the NBA when the like your leaping arena, like how much like room you have to get it off. Like he's not gonna be able to have like the clean 2 foot step. And I think the canary in the coal mine for that to me was his like really low free throw attempt rate for compared to field goal attempts was I'm not sure what I here. Sorry, I have it up right here. Is was 25. So he had what 25% free throws compared to field goal attempts, which I think was around like 32 for his competition prior to. So he was never like a huge free throw attempt guy. I think the defense is like he's gonna get steals just from his like his first step is crazy. I'll like admit that, but I I think his like attention is not great. He loses his man like more than I'd want to like take advantage of that. I just see him as more as like topping out as like a decent starter. I just don't see the all-star like supernova upside, which is what I
Yeah,
really shoot for. Yeah.
I certainly understand that, and I honestly don't think he's like a all NBA level upside guy either, despite the tools. I think of him as a guy who's just a really good bet to be like a good complementary player. I think the counter of like his handle right now is really bad. Like it is, and I think people a lot of people like cite the ATO as like a big negative for him in like where I don't think his like feel and his passing is as bad as is rep. Like he's not a great passer. Like don't get me wrong. Like he certainly will misreads and tunnel vision, but like he makes simple passes out of drives where he picks his dribble up, and he is pretty solid like kicking out and laying down at times. And like factoring into those turnovers numbers, like one like he had like multiple turnovers a game like or related to his handle or losing the ball or being too fast for his handle. And then his teammates were also pretty bad. Like this Villanova team was really rough. And he like was not given favors by there was like nobody on that team that could consistently create advantages. There weren't like a ton of great passers on that team.
I'll give you that.
The context was pretty brutal at times. And I think like the flip side of that is like because of his super powerful first step and his strength and explosion, the level of handler he has to get to is like just not losing the ball on every possession. Like I don't think he's ever going to be a good or great handler at all. It's a tough skill to develop, especially to get that level and when the baseline is like this. But for my like optimistic projection, I think if Cam gets to a point where he's just controlling the ball, which seems like a possible thing that we've seen guys go from like players with like really rough handles to passable handles. That I think that is a big avenue for him to kind of be a complementary player. And I see him as not this like I think in the top like 6 or 7 where I have him as someone who projects to be a guy who like is just a monster attacking like off of star advantage creators, like cutting closeouts, secondary pick and rolls, transition. I think he could be one of the best guys in the league in that role, which matters. And I'm probably a little higher on defense than you. I like his off-ball defense a decent bit. I agree that he's like lapsy in attention stuff, but I don't perceive it as worse than like average for a freshman. And I don't, unless it's like really, really bad or the tools are bad, I tend not to dock that so much. Where there, especially when with him, there were a lot of flashes of making really impressive, like big rim rotations and contests. I think his perimeter D I'm honestly pretty low on. Like his first step is awesome, but he's really, as you mentioned, he's really slow, like turning his hips and getting around to close out and to cover ground, as we talked about being so important. So I certainly see the downside with Cam. I think there's absolutely worlds where he doesn't work. I'm very into like what he can be as like an off-ball offensive player with defensive skill. But I think it's a really interesting conversation, and he's a super interesting prospect. So I'm glad we got to go over this.
No, I mean, he's like I still love watching. I think the biggest like point in his favor is like Villanova ran like no transition at all, and like that's you have to get him out there. Like
Yeah.
Team USA when he played in the like U17 or whatever, just like nonstop just like
Yeah.
dunking over everyone, which like
Context matters a lot when
yeah.
like we're evaluating
So
skills and such as always, because it's like, what if
I
this
hope
guy
it
was
works
in
out.
like
Yeah.
what if this guy
Yeah.
played for Nate Oates? Like how would that look? Like who knows?
Right. I
But
could be stubborn on this. I don't know. We'll see.
yeah, I mean it's not like you think he's like a bad prospect or anything. Like and like I
Right,
also
right, right.
understand from the perspective that like I think both of us agree that like the like top 20s range is really strong. And it's like
Yeah.
a lot of these guys who I'm like lower on in this range. It's not that I don't like them. I just prefer other guys over.
Yeah, yeah. It's just the first time I saw Cam, I was like, this guy's gonna be a top 5 for me, like for sure. Like there's no way. And
He's
now
that kind
like
of highlight
you're
offensive.
right. Like
All
he's
right.
still gonna be a cool player no matter.
Let's get
But
to a couple more questions. Bulat Guzaryov commented again. I apologize. Who would you call this year's Desmond Bain, i.e., under the radar prospect with clear physical limitations, but shall flourish in the modern NBA? I feel like we both are going to have the same very obvious answer here.
yeah,
Yeah,
puns.
it's
Is that it?
Bichemsky.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've
Yeah,
talked about
yeah.
him plenty. Just like the high feel, really smart shot making skill. I just wanted to get that out there because like yeah,
Future Grizz probably. We'll
that
see.
was a really easy one.
Yeah.
A couple more good ones that I liked. At Baby Eric Zero, do you ever think it makes sense for a bad / rebuilding team to take someone other than the best prospects remaining for the sake of fit? Why or why not? Matt, I'll let you take this one at first. What do you think here?
Sorry, what was that one? I don't know if it was on my
All good.
sorry, can you repeat it? I was trying to
All
find it in
good.
the doc.
Do you ever think it makes sense
You
for a
can answer
bad
first.
/ rebuilding team to take someone other than the best prospects available for the sake of fit? Why or why not?
Um I think as long as there's a developmental spot for it, right? Is like beyond like the obvious, I would take it. But just like in general, I guess my strategy is like the stars create the fit, you know? So like if
Absolutely.
there's someone that you think is gonna like be that level of like complete right. I take the talent. I'm very
Yeah.
strongly on the like the misses aren't as painful as the hits, right?
Absolutely. And like that's
Yeah.
where it's like we're swinging on guys and like, missing versus letting other teams get them and them being stars.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's
But
fun. Yeah.
I think there are definitely like plausible. I mean, I think at some point, like regardless, you always take BPA if there's someone so much better. You mentioned that stars make the fit, and especially for young rebuilding teams like Detroit, Houston, OKC a couple years ago, whatever, like it's hard to know what that team structure is going to look like when they're good. So I don't think there really
Yeah.
is a fit. Like they're obviously like I think for like for Houston as an example, I wrote down like I think I would like reach for Anthony Black for them. Like that would be a good pick because they just desperately need like a high field connective piece, pick and roll
Yeah.
playmaker. Where I think that would make sense to take him over higher upside players because of their core is built is built around these like advantage creators and such. So I think that's a situation where the development, where you're kind of talking about developmental fit rather than on court fit. It's not as much like a this is the scheme fit. Well, I think it does do double for the Rockets, but I think it's more of a like a these are the kind of guys that are going to aid in their stars pieces development already and can help them become like the best team that they can and however that looks. So awesome. I think we're gonna do one more. I have like quite a few more on this list, but we're already at like over an hour. Again, apologies if we didn't get to your questions. So I will answer them on Twitter or whatever. So because we haven't really talked about this guy much today, Quack said, "What is Amen Thompson's realistic floor? In what role will he thrive in the NBA if he doesn't develop his shooting?" I think this is an interesting question. I think the floor with the men is definitely higher than some people might give him credit for, as is the case with basically every high ceiling prospect. Their floors are almost always higher than they're given credit for because their high ceiling generally means there's multiple ways that they can succeed, which means that if they fail, there's multiple kind of buoys to their game that they can hold themselves up with. And I said this on a pod I was on last night, and I don't mean this pejoratively at all. I mean this complimentary. Like I think like worse, like you can see like Ben Simmons stuff with Amen, where like Ben Simmons was like the worst scorer and shooter ever, and still ended up being like an all-star plus level player with his other unique special traits. And I think Amen's other like unique special traits could be enough to make him a very good player even if the shot is horrible. But I definitely think
Yeah.
the shot being totally untenable probably holds him back from his highest ends outcomes. What do you think though?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with basically everything you said. I think right. The way I view it is basically it kind of took me a while to like to click, but like athleticism is kind of opportunity, right? And like number of chances you'll get to develop that skill is based on how often can you stay on the floor and just like the natural
Yeah.
like as far as like basketball athletes go, it's tough to get it better than Amen Thompson. I think like a floor for him, yeah, assume the shot doesn't work at all. I kind of like view him almost like a better. I want to write this article about comparing him to like Tyreek Evans' career as just like a
That's
better first
awesome.
step
I would love
as
that.
far as guys
I
who
love
are
Tyreek.
had struggle maybe like could get to the rim whenever they want but like preferred the like finger roll finish instead of or like
Right.
the craft never really totally came around as far as finishing for Tyreek. But he was still like a really good six man and Amin Thompson's more
Exactly.
a better
I think it's
prospect
these
for him. So
ideas that like these high level prospects who might be seen as like boomer bust generally have ways to succeed in ways that we don't expect. Like I think Tyreek is a great example. I always think of Fultz, who obviously there was like off court weirdness, but like hitting a super low outcome, he's still like a top 75 level player with his driving and his passing and such. So I think with these top prospects, it's difficult for me to say that it's very rare that there's someone who's like a legit boomer bust because these special prospects like a man with special traits, like the athleticism, the passing, probably the defense, like there are going to be ways he makes that
yeah,
valuable. And I
he's
think
such as right like
such a
creative. He's such a
brilliant,
like sorry, go ahead.
yeah,
Like
it's just such
creative
a
like
brilliant
problem
creative player.
solver,
I think we're
right?
saying the same thing. Just such a genius basketball player that it's harder for those guys to really fail.
Yeah,
So cool. It seems like we're
agreed.
aligned there. And agree that I am fully with you on Asar being like right there with him as a prospect. I have him like I think I have him like maybe like 4 or 5 next to him, but he is so freaking good. He's so freaking good. Awesome. So thank you a ton, Matt, for coming on and giving us some awesome insight, answering some viewer questions. Feel free to take this chance to plug whatever you want, do whatever. Floor is yours.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Ben. It's been great. Yeah, just first of all, follow Swish Theory at Swish Theory and visit us at theswishtheory.com. We'll have our board coming out, if not Tuesday, Wednesday. So check that out and follow me at DraftPal. And yeah, thanks again, Ben.
Of course, yeah. Follow Matt. I love his stuff. One of the best analysts still in the public space out there on Twitter. And Swish is always putting out cool content too. I enjoyed our guy Tyler's piece on Nick Smith and Cason Wallace this morning. Interesting look at non-primary guards, which is something we talked about today on the pod, which could certainly be relevant. So again, more formal than normally I don't do an outro, but sub, like, comment if you enjoyed the video. I think this will go up sometime before the draft. So have a nice day, everyone.